The TARDIS has landed, but it is still moving. The Doctor, Susan, Ian and Barbara all decide to exit to discover what's causing this. They notice they have landed inside another spaceship, but there is evidence of a catastrophe. They find several humanoids who all appear to be dead. Deciphering that these people have only just died, they conclude that there is nothing they can do for them and decide to return to the TARDIS. As they prepare to leave, one of the seemingly dead bodies moves. This startles the travellers and they all rush over to the humanoid. He directs Ian through a cabinet of supplies to locate a remedy to his condition. He tells Barbara to place another of these on the other individual's chest. It's revealed they weren't actually dead, but in a very deep sleep that stopped their hearts. The humanoid reveals himself as astronaut Maitland, and the other is his co-astronaut, Carol. Maitland reveals he's from Earth and informs Ian and Barbara what has changed since the 20th century. Being from the 28th century, the pair of astronauts suggest that the travellers leave due to some form of danger. Maitland explains the danger they speak of, that there is a planet called the Sensphere, the creatures there are called the Sensorites, and they are keeping the humans within this area of space. He states that the Sensorites are hostile by keeping them here, but do not seem to be a physical danger. The Sensorites are the cause of the death-appearing deep sleep, even appearing every so often to provide the humans with food. Maitland and Carol want the travellers to leave to prevent them from having the same fate. An unknown figure places a tool in front of the TARDIS's lock, removing it from the police box exterior. The travellers prepare to leave. They notice the lock has been removed, with Susan stating it's more than a lock, it's the TARDIS's opening and closing mechanism, and without it, they are permanently stuck outside. The Doctor wonders if any of them had personally seen the Sensorites. They state that the third member of their crew, the mineralogist called John, has. The Doctor wants to talk with him, but Maitland regards this as impossible and doesn't want to say why. Barbara and Susan, in search of water, misses the drawer that is labelled as such. They open a door that ventures further into the ship as the hand of a dishevelled-looking individual closes the door behind them and slowly walks towards their direction. As he approaches the pair, he faints, and they try to return back to the others, but find the door won't open. They quickly turn back and try to hide in another room, but the figure in visible distress returns and enters the room, but doesn't notice them before leaving. Carol reveals the figure is John, and that the Sensorites' effect on him is much worse than theirs. As John approaches Susan and Barbara again, he breaks down on the floor and asks who they are, hoping they can help him. Barbara comforts him, while Susan wonders what has happened. A high-pitched noise begins, which Carol states is from the machines the Sensorites use to travel. They look outside and see the Sensorite craft moving closer towards them. The Doctor wonders, are they coming back just to take over their minds, or finish the job by killing them? The noise suddenly stops. They all wait for the Sensorites to approach. As Ian looks outside, he notices one of them look into the ship. The Doctor informs Ian to stay calm, as they notice both Maitland and Carol have been taken over by fear. The Doctor tries to shake Maitland out of it. Maitland remembers that they need to rescue Susan and Barbara, but John wants to protect them from the Sensorites, who are trying to force him to comply. The Sensorites have entered the ship via the loading bay. Susan has the idea to use their brains against them, recalling a past adventure with something similar to this. She instructs Barbara to think the same as she does. Both of them make a united front in their minds of the words, "We defy you." This causes the Sensorites physical pain and leads to Susan collapsing. Because Susan was strong-willed and focused, the Sensorites were unable to attack her, but the Doctor warns her about the danger of all those voices inside her head. Maitland reveals that John's hair and appearance looks much older than his age of 30. Ian states that John muttered something about riches, From this, they deduce that he has discovered something the Sensorites didn't want them to, explaining why he's affected worse than the others. The Sensorites have recovered from Susan's attack and monitor the situation from afar. The Doctor discovers what John found was molybdenum, with the Sensphere being filled with it. The Sensorites mentally attack Maitland and Carol, so Ian and Barbara decide to locate them. They venture into the rear of the ship, where they encounter the pair. Ian gets Barbara to return to the others in order to lock the doors, while he continues to move backwards as they slowly advance towards him. Barbara gets John to help her lock the door. The Sensorites telepathically connect with Susan, who inform her that they want to talk with the others. The Doctor agrees, as long as they don't harm them. The Sensorites tell them that they cannot leave the Sensphere's orbit due to the molybdenum. They state how they trusted humans before and have come to regret it due to them being a cause of a fearful affliction. The Sensorites want to take them to the Sensphere, where they have created a specialist area for the humans. The Doctor wants them to return the TARDIS's lock, not making a threat, but a promise of more trouble than they can deal with. The two Sensorites leave to make a decision. The Doctor has noticed that the Sensorites have a weakness. They have poor vision within the dark, which can be used against them. Susan is contacted by the Sensorites telepathically. She agrees to do what they say as long as the others aren't harmed. They have given Susan an ultimatum, which she couldn't refuse. Go down to the Sensphere with them, or they'll all be killed. The others pursue Susan and the Sensorites, with the latter wondering why they are hostile when they don't present any danger. Susan states that the Sensorites trust her because she can use telepathy. The only reason they seem to be enemies is because of suspicion. The Doctor states that Susan doesn't have the ability to represent them, with Susan feeling like they're just treating her like a child. The Doctor's demands that she come back with them work, and before the Sensorites can use their tool against the travellers, Ian turns out the lights, causing them to lose their sight. The Sensorites have to contact the Sensphere for instructions on what to do next, with the Doctor being impatient when this takes a while to do. The Doctor talks with Susan. He doesn't like how she made a decision without agreeing it with anyone else. The Doctor dislikes how the Sensorites seem to have put a wedge between him and his granddaughter, stating how they've never had an argument before. The Sensorites have orders from their leader, known as the First Elder. They are to listen and transfer the words. The Doctor states that he only wants one thing: freedom. Carol talks with John, who continues to be overwhelmed with the Sensorite voices in his head. Carol regards him as a lost cause, while the Sensorites intend to take him and the others, bar Maitland and Barbara, down to the Sensphere. The Sensorites explain why they are apprehensive against humans. Previously, there had been 5 humans on the Sensphere, but they closed their minds off to the Sensorites. Eventually, the humans left on their ship, but it exploded within the Sensphere's atmosphere. Only 2 of them were definitely known to be on the ship. The other 3 were assumed to be the cause of the explosion, fighting the other humans for control. This explosion poisoned the Sensorites' atmosphere, causing a death toll that increases year by year. The First Elder is allowing them to visit his planet in the hope that they can help a dying race. They all make their goodbyes to Barbara as they leave. On the Sensphere, the First Elder discusses with his people about the humans, stating he intends to fight fire with fire in the hopes of stopping the deaths of his people. The Sensphere's city administrator is doubtful of the humans' intentions, feeling that the humans will cause great risk to them and must be eliminated. John's thoughts about bringing fleets of spaceships to mine the Sensphere of all its molybdenum were exposed to the Sensorites. With these thoughts, they feared the end of their civilization, so trapped the human ship in orbit around the Sensphere to prevent it from happening. The effect it had on John is purely a result of his mind being fully open in that moment, and not having any defense against the full power of their telepathy. The city administrator regards the elders as weak, wanting to overthrow them. Ian begins to cough, revealing he's caught the same disease inflicted upon the Sensorites. The doctor wonders why it has affected Ian, but not him and Susan. They try and decipher the cause of it, with the first elder informing them that it's not contagious. The doctor deduces that it is the aqueduct water that is causing this illness, and it affects them all at varying degrees, explaining the inconsistent death time for each individual infected. The doctor decides to work with the Sensorite scientists to further investigate this. Ian is given at most 3 days before he succumbs to the illness, with the doctor regarding this as ample time to cure both Ian and the entire Sensorite race. The city administrator denies there being anything wrong with their water, stating this is just manipulation by the humans. The second elder decides to inform the first of this. While he is gone, the administrator gloats at John that his thoughts are not believed, as he is blocked by the machine that is curing him. The administrator declares he is the enemy of all Earth creatures. Carol, not recognizing the administrator, gives him the idea of changing their badges and sashes to manipulate the humans. Susan tries to listen in on the telepathic communication between the Sensorite elders. They deny the doctor access to the TARDIS, causing him to be outraged. Susan has to reassure the Sensorites that they don't intend to be hostile, they just aren't informed about what hurts them. The doctor requests water samples for all districts to narrow down where exactly the poisoned water is coming from. He analyses all the samples and discovers atropine poison, with caffeine citrate being the antidote. The city administrator holds the second elder hostage, deeming him a traitor. He removes the sachet from him in a bid to impersonate him and foil the doctor's plans to cure everyone. He takes the cure from another Sensorite, refusing to give it to Ian, smashing the vial on the floor. The doctor is taken to the entrance of the aqueduct. Here he discovers that they avoid the aqueduct due to the noise and darkness. The other Sensorites have given Ian some of the antidote, wondering why the second elder didn't deliver it initially. They are informed that the doctor has ventured into the aqueduct. Ian is forced to go with Susan, despite still recovering from the poisoning. The Sensorites have no hope of rescuing the doctor. The first elder communicates with the second, unaware that he has been apprehended by the administrator, who threatens him if he doesn't comply. The administrator, being informed of the doctor's journey into the aqueduct and how Ian and Susan have followed after him, is certain that this has led to his victory, as all 3 of them will surely perish. The doctor has discovered deadly nightshade within the aqueduct, but he hears a growl from an unknown source. As Susan and Ian search for him, they hear him scream out before discovering he has been attacked, with his jacket being ripped to shreds. The doctor, coming to, confirms that he did not see the creature that attacked him. The doctor, Susan and Ian deduce that the creature isn't the only enemy. They have one within the ranks of the Sensorites as well. They agree to return to the city in order to discover which Sensorite it is, not noticing that one of them is already in the aqueduct, observing from behind the pipes. John continues to talk about evil and treachery, trying to warn them of a plot, but the Sensorites dismiss this as an illusion. The city administrator forces the captive second elder to send a message to meet the senior warrior and obtain the firing key for their disintegrator. The Doctor notices who he thinks is the second elder and tries to speak with him, only to be ignored. As the administrator returns from the meeting, the actual second elder tries to overthrow him. This causes the administrator's aide to inadvertently kill the second elder. The first elder discusses with the Doctor and the others that the actions of the second elder are strange, and he has since disappeared. The first elder's aide provides the Doctor with a cloak to replace his ripped jacket. The administrator has manipulated the situation, so it looks like the Doctor is the one who has killed the second elder, with the senior warrior backing him up on this. Ian is able to prove the Doctor's innocence by revealing that the Doctor does not have any coat pockets, considering his jacket had been destroyed earlier, which the administrator's aide insisted the Doctor wore when killing the second elder. With his initial plan failing, the city administrator tries to pin the entirety of the deception on the now deceased second elder. The Doctor and the others think that the city administrator should be promoted to the role of second elder, being unaware it was he who has manipulated the situation from the start. John's finished his last treatment and Carol is overwhelmed with emotion to see him back to his old self. John has hazy memory of what happened to him. The others join them and Susan talks with John, asking him about the danger he was trying to warn them of. John remembers that one of the Sensorites was a danger to them, but he can't remember much more. The newly appointed second elder tries to affirm to them that it was the old second elder who was the culprit before they can figure out the truth. One of the Sensorite scientists revealed that the humans had previously had an interest in the Sensphere's aqueduct. He agrees to provide the Doctor with a detailed structure of it. This conversation leads to Susan remembering the city administrator, who John confirms to be the Sensorite who was plotting against them. The Doctor and Ian meet with the first elder. They convince him of their plan to venture back into the aqueduct and defeat their enemies, who are directly poisoning the water supply. They ask if Barbara can be brought down to the Sensphere to assist them. The new second elder sabotages the detailed plans of the aqueduct in order to trap the Doctor and Ian within. The pair are provided weapons as they prepare for their journey. They make sure that Susan is not informed of this, keeping her in the city. The first elder deciphers that if the travellers did not kill the second elder, then one of the other Sensorites must be the culprit. Carol ventures into the city's main plaza when an unseen figure grabs her. The figure, being the antagonistic new second elder, blackmails Carol to write John a letter, claiming she has returned to the spaceship. Barbara, having come down to the city and who is now with both John and Susan, suspects that the note is a forgery, with them knowing Carol was forced to write it, as none of them had encountered her during Barbara's journey to the Sensphere. The first elder greets Barbara. She asks where the Doctor and Ian are. He informs her that they are safe, but that they also told him not to tell them of their plan. They show the first elder Carol's falsified letter, who knows he didn't authorise it, and they clue him onto it being something she was forced to do. Because he can see that this is clearly worrying them, the first elder decides to inform them that Ian and the Doctor have ventured down into the aqueduct. The Doctor and Ian notice that the weapons they were provided are useless, with their inside filaments having been deliberately removed. They realise their efforts have been sabotaged. Carol is being held in the disintegrator room when John enters. The Sensorite holding her hostage threatens her life, but before he can do so, Carol pulls the wire, destroying the disintegrator. The Sensorite is apprehended while the first elder talks with the unknowingly treacherous second about the situation. The first elder believes that another Sensorite is also involved. Barbara pleads with the first elder to help them find the Doctor and Ian with an authentic map. The second elder tries to convince the first otherwise, but the first is overwhelmingly convinced due to the Doctor having created a cure for his people. The Doctor and Ian notice something up ahead of them. Ian pursues it and discovers it is actually another human. The Doctor puts another piece of the puzzle together. It's one of the 5 humans from the exploded spaceship who is poisoning the water. Barbara decides to venture into the aqueduct with John, while Susan stays behind. Barbara will use a mind transmitter provided by the Sensorites, so Susan can use her telepathy to guide Barbara through the tunnels without risk. Susan informs the First Elder of her home. With him having come to trust her and the humans, he agrees to allow them to return to the TARDIS. The Doctor and Ian realise they have been ambushed by not just one human, but multiple. The humans planned to kill all the Sensorites by poisoning them. It is revealed that all three of the ones assumed to be on the spaceship have actually been living in the aqueduct this entire time. Barbara and John pick up on marks throughout the tunnels that have been made by the Doctor, confirming they are on his and Ian's trail. The Doctor informs the three humans that their war with the Sensorites is over, pretending that the planet has been completely taken over by humans. Their leader informs the Doctor and Ian that two of his men lied about returning to Earth to get reinforcements, but actually fled, explaining that he had to blow up their spaceship. They want the molybdenum on the planet for themselves. John and Barbara arrive and they all play along to lure the three humans out into the city. As the three of them exit the aqueduct, they are apprehended by the Sensorites. Their leader tries to make a run for it, but is knocked unconscious, but not killed, an act which the Doctor states shows great promise for the Sensorites' future. The evidence of the tampered map has proved the Second Elder's treachery, with his punishment being banishment. The First Elder informs Ian and Barbara that the TARDIS's lock has been returned to its exterior as they make their farewells. Back on the TARDIS, the Doctor and Susan talk, with her informing the Doctor that her telepathic ability isn't strong enough to read minds outside of the Sensphere. The Doctor notes, however, that if they ever return home, they could look into perfecting it. Ian, making a failed joke at Maitland being able to control his destination, unlike the Doctor, has the Doctor exclaim that Ian can stay behind at whatever their next destination is. As the seventh story in the first season, the Sensorites was given the production code of the letter G. The Sensorites was written by Peter R. Newman and had two directors, with the first 4 episodes being directed by associate producer Mervyn Pinfield, and the last 2 being directed by Frank Cox, who returns to Doctor Who after directing The Brink of Disaster. Verity Lambert's role as producer continues. All 4 main cast members from previous stories continue yet again with this one, though one of the cast members would again take 2 weeks holiday, with it being Jacqueline Hill's turn, where Barbara is absent for episodes 4 and 5 of the story, where it's written in that Barbara stays behind in the ship, while the other 3 characters travel to the Sensphere. Raymond Cusick continues to be the designer for these sci-fi futuristic serials. The 6 episodes were released on BBC One between the 20th of June and the 1st of August, 1964. Episode 2, The Unwilling Warriors, was broadcast 25 minutes behind schedule due to the summer grandstand. Episode 3 onwards was delayed by 1 week due to the summer grandstand again causing delays by being extended on the 4th of July, taking over what was meant to be Hidden Danger's time slot. The Sensorites episodes were recorded between the 29th of May and the 3rd of July, 1964. As with the Aztecs, the studios for the Sensorites were swapped around during the phasing out of Lime Grove Studio D. The idea for what would become the Sensorites can be dated back to January 1964, with the overall idea for the serial being to show that not all alien beings are hostile killers. Between the 25th of February and the 21st of May, Peter Newman submitted the scripts for the 6 episodes of the serial, though initially all scripts for the serial were planned to be delivered by the end of March. By the 2nd of March 1964, the Sensorites had been slotted into Serial G. In early June 1964, the Second Elder was to appear within Episode 6, A Desperate Venture, but in the final production, he was killed off in the previous episode. The serial was inspired by the time Peter Newman spent in a Japanese POW camp during World War II, also being inspired by 1950s films of the same war, and also the theme of soldiers who continue to fight once the war is over. A production error, focused on as a special feature on the DVD release, is of a woman's voice calling out camera shots. This was a production assistant whose voice was somehow picked up on by the studio microphones. Unlike episode 1 of The Daleks, this wasn't discovered before broadcast, so was unable to be rectified by remounting the episode. The insert shot of Maitland's ship flying away seen on the TARDIS scanner was filmed by the following serial's director, Henrik Hirsch. Hartnell was shadowed on set during the production of The Sensorites by Brian Proudfoot, who doubled as Hartnell in outside shots created for the following serial. The spaceship set design was inspired by 1940s Dakota military aircraft, while the Sensorite city had designer Raymond Cusick focus on a curved aesthetic. We get another example of the Doctor's unseen past travels, where the Doctor talks about his encounter with King Henry VIII, stating it was long before Ian and Barbara came on the scene, establishing that him and Susan have been travelling for quite some time. Another example is given by Susan, when her and Barbara are trapped in the rear of the ship with John. This story is referenced several times within modern Doctor Who. First is with Susan's description of her home planet when talking with the First Elder, that further confirms that her and the Doctor don't come from Earth. Their home planet, later becoming known as Gallifrey, would be described the same way by the 10th Doctor to companion Martha Jones in the modern show with the Series 3 episode Gridlock. The Sensphere itself would get a reference the following series, again featuring the 10th Doctor, with it being established that they are located near the Ood Sphere, depicted within the episode Planet of the Ood. A rare sight in the entire 26-season run of the original Doctor Who is a shot of the TARDIS team exiting the interior and the camera continuing the shot to show where they have landed. Thankfully, all 6 episodes of The Sensorites survive due to 16mm telerecordings, with the negatives being recovered from BBC Enterprises in 1978. Just like with the Keys of Marinus, documentation exists for telesnaps for the first 2 episodes, but the telesnaps themselves seem to be unaccounted for. The Sensorites was released in a VHS box set with 2 other First Doctor stories, The Time Meddler and The Gunfighters, in November 2002. In 2012, The Sensorites was released on DVD. As of July 2025, the Sensorites Blu-ray release as part of the Season 1 collection set has yet to be announced. The Sensorites became part of the classic Doctor Who back catalogue present on BBC iPlayer in late 2023. A novelisation of The Sensorites was released in July 1987, written by Nigel Robinson. This version was re-released as an audiobook in May 2012, narrated by William Russell. I like how Strangers in Space has the characters converse about how their experiences have changed them. It's that acknowledgement that rewards the viewer for watching from the start, which makes it all the more sad that we have missing episodes. It's these little moments that give depth to these characters and leads us to get attached to them. I always enjoy to see a future from a 1960s perspective, where we have fictional examples of what could happen, like how Maitland states that the lower half of England has become Central City. The Doctor has the gall to state he learned to not meddle in other people's affairs years ago, with this getting a noticeable laugh out of Ian, who has plenty of experience to the contrary. I think it's a shame that Maitland and Carol just left John to suffer alone in the back of the ship, perhaps giving us a look into how people in the 1960s thought about those with mental health issues being locked away from the rest of everyone instead of helping them. This being an aspect of the story set in the future that reminds us it was actually made during the 1960s and thus had the mindset of that era within it. John stating he will protect Barbara and Susan from the Sensorites perhaps comes from a place of patriarchy where the men are the ones who will protect the women, but I think Barbara in this situation is just wanting to make sure he is alright, and this seems to be a glimmer of sanity for him. The Unwilling Warriors has refilmed the shot with the Sensorite outside of the ship, with it being from a completely different angle. This is more noticeable than other instances of this practice due to the new shot lacking the Sensorite's hands. The Doctor has an interesting statement of, "The calmer you are, the stronger," showing what sort of person he is. John's characterization has characteristics similar to that of someone with schizophrenia, including things like psychosis, hallucinations, and delusions, as well as him hearing voices. I think a highlight of this story overall is its usage of the Doctor and Susan with their unseen backstories, with this second episode of the serial having Susan speak about their adventure on a planet called Esto and how it's given her the knowledge to help fight back against the Sensorites. I like how Susan is used within this serial. It seems to be the only time within the show, post the first episode of An Unearthly Child, to understand that Susan isn't just a standard schoolgirl who screams a lot. She's not human and has this otherworldly quality to her, being telepathic, enabling her to communicate with the Sensorites. Unfortunately, however, it seems that by the time this serial was underway, it had already been decided that Susan was to leave the show in the upcoming Dalek Return serial. The Doctor also has some level of telepathy shown when he thanks Ian for something he thought but didn't say. Hidden Danger has the others treat Susan as if she's nothing but a child. This compares to how most of the writers have treated her up until this point. The Doctor is incredibly grumpy at the start of this episode due to him not being used to Susan speaking out against him, but this is, as Barbara states, because she is growing up, something which the Doctor will have to come to accept, but right now he blames the Sensorites for this, due to them being easier to blame than the truth. I noticed a similarity between the arched doorways of the Dalek city on Skaro and the architecture present in the Sensphere's city. The first Elder describing humans as loud and ugly things is funny, as there is some generalised truth to that claim. The first Elder stating that no opinion is sometimes worse than a dogmatic one reminds me of the Jedi from the Star Wars prequel trilogy. I feel like Carol is representative of people who have a lot of superstitions with individuals like John, who are mentally unwell. We have characters like Susan reminding her that he should not be ignored just because he's not in the right state of mind. Ian again gets poisoned as a cliffhanger ending, repeating what happened in the previous serial, The Aztecs. By episode 4, A Race Against Death, I started to think that the 5 humans did not cause the virus, but instead the city administrator and other members of the Sensorites who have a biased hatred of humans and wanted to frame them. I like how structured the Sensorites are portrayed. We have the city administrator who is instantly against the humans and would rather they all be dead, the first Elder who believes the humans and wants to help, and then we have the second Elder who is somewhere in the middle. He is hesitant to trust the humans, but doesn't defy the orders of the first Elder, or outright wants the humans killed, like the administrator does. The scene where the city administrator destroys the antidote has an abrupt cut-off for the incidental music. The scene afterwards also has a quick shot where you can see the boom mic before it is quickly moved off-screen. Episode 5, Kidnap, has an instance where the Doctor states he has a singular heart. Of course, this makes me think about how future Doctors would be established as having 2 hearts, showing the ever-shifting continuity of the Doctor and his species. The Doctor being glad that John doesn't hold a grudge against the Sensorites reminds me of how the Doctor himself initially thought they were his enemies, showing a growth in his character. You could say the Doctor's arc in this serial is him not only learning to accept that Susan is naturally growing up, but to also not judge aliens so quickly, just like the overall message of the story itself. John stating how Carol is the only thing he really cares about shows how his initial discovery that led to the Sensorites overpowering his mind was clearly just a brief thought, and he probably wouldn't have actually gone through with it. It's also nice to see what seems to be a genuine relationship within this series, after we've had forced ones with arranged marriages, a clearly abusive one, or one that really only became relevant within a serial's final episode. This one has been written within the entire story, even if I think Carol's initial action of locking John in the rear of the ship wasn't the right thing to do. Barbara is instantly iconic in episode 6 because despite being on the ship for the equivalent of 2.5 episodes, she has already figured out the situation, seeming to know more than John, who has been present for longer. Susan makes a good point about how the Sensorites' way of trusting everyone could lead to their downfall, as individuals are known to abuse trust, as we've seen throughout this serial, with the treacherous city administrator turned new second elder. This is also true of real life, where people need to earn each other's trust, as if you blindly trust someone, who's to say they won't abuse that position? Despite the serial having 6 parts, the secondary plot of the city administrator turned second elder gets resolved relatively quickly, as the final episode shifted to wrapping up the plot of the poisoned water. The Doctor informing Susan that once they get home, they could pursue her telepathic abilities makes you feel sad for them, because ultimately they never will make it home. Him and Susan seem to have some hope in this serial that they will return home eventually, with only the Doctor ever actually getting to achieve this, but by then he's forced to do it, not out of choice, and I don't think it would ever feel the same to him without Susan. It feels tragic, like these two characters are lost in time and space and want to go back. But by the time of season 3's The Massacre, the Doctor laments on how he can't go back. Whether he likes Gallifrey or not, there's still that element of him longing to return to what's familiar. Susan wanting to belong somewhere seems to be the first bit of sowing the seeds of her upcoming exit, which was set in stone by this point. The Doctor being less mellowed out compared to previous stories comes up at the conclusion of A Desperate Venture, where I think by this point he wouldn't let Ian's jokes get to him as much as it seems to, though this is most likely just the Doctor's character trait of being very defensive with the TARDIS. It still comes off very jarring after he just had a nice emotional moment with Susan. This clearly being done to set up some form of last-minute cliffhanger to lead into the next story. The Sensorites does suffer from slow pacing in certain areas, but while it does seem to be less memorable compared to others, I wouldn't necessarily call it bad. On my rewatch of this serial, I will admit it took me 4 episodes into the story to get fully invested with the plot. I do think that it was a good thing to show that not all aliens are hostile. Like humans, they can have both good and bad individuals within their society, and the whole society shouldn't be judged based on the actions of individuals. I enjoy that we seem to get an alien species who seem to all consist of one gender, especially after we have so many aliens in other franchises, like Star Wars, that have a 2-gender binary. I think a missed opportunity was that we didn't actually get to see any of the ill Sensorites infected with the poison. All we had was many different Sensorites say their people were ill. I noticed quite a few line fluffs from characters within this serial, more so than the previous ones within the season, particularly from the actors playing the Sensorites. Further to this, the overall audio quality in this serial seems to be a bit more muffled compared to others, with the characters having noticeable artifacts present in their recorded dialogue. Hopefully this can be somewhat remedied on the eventual Season 1 collection Blu-ray release. While I do miss Jacqueline Hill during the 2.5 episodes she's absent for, I do think that it makes sense that Barbara would be written out here, considering how important her role was within the previous story. Her getting a break of screen time allows the show to focus on the other characters for a bit, and I certainly think that this benefited Susan's role in the story, which would have no doubt been less important had Barbara been involved in the Sensphere part of the story. Despite this, I did enjoy when the end of episode 5 has the characters agree with the First Elder to bring Barbara down to the Sensphere, with her return being most welcome. I do think this serial could have been received more highly had it been produced as only 4 episodes. You could cut out a bunch of stuff and refine the story. They could have refined the plot down a bit by making it so that the actions of the city administrator could have been more connected to the main plot of the water being poisoned, perhaps revealing it as one big scheme by the city administrator to turn the First Elder against the humans and gain power. Instead, having the 5 humans being completely innocent, and it just being superstition that they were the cause of the poisoning. This would have the added benefit of the city administrator's comeuppance not being written off as something that happened off-screen. This would focus the story around the element of trust that is featured throughout, removing the human villains and instead having it be about the Sensorites misjudging the humans and blindly trusting their own. I personally feel that the human villains really didn't add much to the serial, with them only factoring in at the very end, and instead they could have been left as a misunderstood backstory. The city administrator would have also been the cause of the exploded ship, with Maitland, Carol and John being sent there to find out what happened. The Sensorites trapping them in orbit, not just because of John's thoughts, but because of the city administrator's scheme as well. These refinements could also remove some of the inconsistencies within the serial, like how episode 2 ends with Susan stating that the Sensorites will kill the others if she doesn't go with them, before episode 3 has the Sensorites shocked that the humans are hostile towards them when they've literally just threatened them with death. We then also have the First Elder state that the Sensorite responsible for the deception will be executed, only for him to later reveal that he got banished instead, with there not being any explanation as to whether a banished Sensorite would die outside of the Sensphere's city. The Sensorites is a story that is seen as one of the least interesting or liked within the show's first season, and while that may be true, it's still not as bad as other stories that are a part of future seasons. I think the early days of Doctor Who are very strong, and are definitely the backbone for why the show has lasted as long as it has. I now have an active channel membership available. This will grant you exclusive perks like emojis in the comments, usernames listed in my outros, and updates to what's coming next posted exclusively for members in the community tab. But the best feature is you get 5 days early access to new videos, and you will be supporting me at the same time. To find out more, you can click the join button on my channel page. Thank you to anyone who considers becoming a channel member. Thank you for watching. Please see the video description below for interesting links, sources and credits. My current goal is to reach 1,000 subscribers, so if you enjoyed, please like, subscribe and comment. Until the next time, goodbye.